Inside the Buffalo Mafia.
What have I ever done to make you treat me so disrespectful? He'd come to me.
During the turn of the century, New York was the epicenter for mafiosi making their way to the land of opportunity. They weren't just limited to the 5 boroughs, they were spread out thick all over the East Coast. One hotspot in particular was a choice location for gangsters making their exodus out of New York City and was clear across to the opposite end of the state to the city of Buffalo. As a gateway between Canada and the United States, Buffalo was a key city for the early mafia, and it became even more important as a conduit for illegal alcohol during Prohibition. Sometime during the early 1900s, Angelo Palmeri emerged as a powerful and influential Sicilian mafioso who took over Buffalo's Little Italy by extorting Italian business owners. He led a group of black-hand extortionists who preyed on both legal and illegal businesses, including the taxing of local pimps, prostitutes, and drug dealers. He opened a tavern that catered to the city's more unsavory characters and ran gambling rackets out the back. Palmeri's affiliation was with a mafia group known as the Castellammarese clan, which had satellite groups all across the United States. His reputation was enhanced by the nickname Buffalo Bill, which he reportedly earned because he wore cowboy hats and carried a holstered pistol. He was considered the first mafia boss in Buffalo, New York. At some point, Palmeri would cross paths with another prominent Italian in the area, Giuseppe DiCarlo. The pair were both leaders in the community and became friends, so they decided to combine their forces and form a mafia clan that would cover all of western New York. It became evident to those paying attention who wielded the real power in Buffalo, and it wasn't Palmeri, it was with his friend and partner in crime, Giuseppe DiCarlo. Apparently Palmeri knew that as well, because in 1912 he stepped down, assuming the role of underboss, allowing DiCarlo to take the reins of the family and become the new boss. On his side he had Filippo Mazzara. A Castellammarese native, Mazzara was a top DiCarlo lieutenant and managed a commission merchant business owned by DiCarlo. His business controlled Prohibition-era sugar distribution in western New York and was highly profitable due in large part for the need for sugar when making illegal liquor. Paul Palmeri moved to Niagara Falls in 1920. There he assisted his brother Angelo in the organization of his bootlegging rackets. Paul and Angelo also went into business together as produce importers and commission merchants. In 1928, Palmeri went into a new line of work and got involved in the funeral home business. Unlike the many other up-and-coming mafiosi that fled Italy to escape murder charges, Magaddino's voyage to the United States was fueled by a vendetta. In the early 1900s, back in the old country of Castellammare del Golfo, Sicily, Magaddino's relatives led a Castellammarese clan that was feuding with the rival Buccellato Mafia clan. After a series of tit-for-tat murders, the Buccellatos managed to kill Stefano's brother Pietro in 1916. This prompted a young Stefano to embark on a mission of retribution to take out as many Buccellatos as he could. There were a lot of them, so Magaddino stayed busy. Several Buccellato clansmen met their ends toward the end of 1916, but it seemed that one got away. When his fellow clansmen started dropping like flies, Camillo Collazo, one of the men Stefano deemed responsible for his brother's death, hightailed it out of Sicily for Ellis Island in 1920, likely trying to avoid Magaddino's fury. These feisty Sicilians were serious about their vendettas. Young Stefano embarked on a journey of retribution to the land of opportunity so he could track down and murder Collazo. Once in the U.S., Stefano linked up with a veteran Castellammare mafioso, Vito Bonventre, and they formed a crew of killers comprised of fellow trusted countrymen to purge the new land of these damn dirty Buccellatos. This mafia death squad was referred to in the press as the Good Killers. Magaddino and his band of murderous mafiosi traveled around picking off Buccellatos and their allies. They were so effective at killing they became more than just a crew fueled by a vendetta, and more so an enforcement arm of the Castellammarese criminal syndicate, taking on other murder contracts all over the country. Then in 1921, Caeso's dead body was pulled from the Shark River, New Jersey. Stricken with guilt, Bartolomeo Fontana confessed to the crime and told authorities that a murderous group of Castellammarese mafiosi forced him to do it. He would go on to give them details of 15 murders committed by the gang, and the one he was ordered to commit under the threat of death. Magaddino and several other members of the Good Killers were arrested as conspirators in Caeso's murder. If you're wondering what's up with the bandage, well, authorities used Fontana to lure Magaddino in by telling him he needs money to get out of town. They met up at a train station where the police were waiting to arrest him. Once Stefano realized Fontana turned on him, he went nuts and attacked him. The police had to beat him down with their nightsticks to fend him off. With Fontana's testimony being the only evidence prosecutors had, they decided to abandon the broader conspiracy case against the Good Killers and focus only on those who had been physically present for the murder of Caeso. So in a twist of sweet irony, the charges against the good killers were dropped and they were let out of jail, and the only one to get convicted was the stool pigeon Fontana, who received a life sentence for his efforts. After his release, Magaddino was shot at but survived an assassination attempt courtesy of the Bucalados. Following that incident, Bucalados started going missing, and of course immediately the police suspected Magaddino. New York City was getting too hot, so he decided to flee Brooklyn to evade further law enforcement scrutiny. Stefano went across to the other end of the state and settled in Buffalo. With his reputation as a killer and his status among the Castellammarese, Stefano quickly became a leading figure amongst the local mafiosi. DiCarlo would die unexpectedly in the summer of 1922, and Magaddino happened to be in the right place at the right time and was chosen as his successor. Magaddino set up shop in Niagara Falls as his base of operations. During the Prohibition era, Magaddino's crime family was ideally positioned to control the flow of illegal liquor into the U.S. from Canada. Then bootlegging dollars greatly enhanced Magaddino's influence and prestige, and not to mention his wealth. He was an old-style boss who preferred to stay in the background and not draw any attention to himself or his criminal activities, if possible. Magaddino ruled his family with an iron fist. He was one of the most powerful mafia bosses during his prime, and is the longest tenured mafia boss in the history of the American Mafia. Magaddino's top lieutenants. Di Benedetto was a fellow countryman and a top aide to Magaddino in the 1920s. When he wasn't with the boss, he was Mazzaro's right-hand man. Sam was a close confidant to Stefano and one of his top bodyguards. He was an expert racketeer and one of the family's top earners early on. Sam's top aide was his brother Francisco. Montana was a highly intelligent and savvy gangster who was able to walk in all circles of life in Buffalo, with the rich businessmen, powerful politicians, and ruthless gangsters. Stefano made Montana his number 2 in command and top advisor. While serving the family, Montana held public office and was a 2-term city councilman. Montana formed the Buffalo Taxi Company, which was highly successful. A few years later, he bought and merged with the Yellow Cab Company. The subsequent firm was the largest taxi company in western New York. John Montana lived a double life, as both a trusted advisor to a mafia don and a trusted advisor to the mayor. He was quite the accomplished man. Montana also served as president of the Frontier Liquor Corporation and as an officer of the Empire State Brewery. In addition, he owned Montana Motors, a Buffalo car dealership. Those wacky Sicilians loved to merge families through marriage, and apparently Magaddino and Montana double merged their families. Montana's nephew Charles would marry the oldest daughter of Don Stefano, and Stefano's only son Peter would marry Montana's niece. Nino got himself into pretty hot water in Sicily. He was facing a double homicide, plus robbery, rape, and extortion in connection to events that took place years earlier. So his brother invited him over to the States to help manage the family's regional bootlegging rackets. Once he arrived, he immediately became Stefano's most trusted lieutenant. After Prohibition, Nino ran some gambling rackets and was installed as vice president of the Magaddino Funeral Home. D'Agostino was a top Magaddino lieutenant also based in Niagara Falls. He was a major drug trafficker and accompanied Stefano to the Appalachian meeting. In 1931, New York Mafia leaders decided to get rid of the boss of bosses position and establish a commission to govern the Mafia in the U.S. The commission consisted of the 7 most powerful Mafia bosses in the country, the heads of the 5 families of New York, Al Capone over in the Windy City, and our boy in Buffalo, Stefano Magaddino. In 1958, Buffalo's FBI field office labeled Magaddino a top hoodlum in its territory. Magaddino was identified as the irrefutable boss of the Mafia of Western New York and Southern Ontario before the McClellan Investigating Committee in 1963. Magaddino built the family to be a formidable borgata that could rival any other in the country at the time. He led his Buffalo family through its glory years and its most powerful and profitable era. Due to his territory's remoteness, Stefano's borgata was, for the most part, geographically isolated from the inter-family squabbles of the New York City-based families. As the Buffalo family increased in size and influence, they were able to spread their tentacles all through western and upstate New York, controlling Rochester, Utica, Syracuse, and all of Ontario, Canada. Stefano earned himself the moniker The Undertaker due to his funeral home business, which he installed his son Peter as president and his brother Nino as vice president. Other notable Buffalo heavyweights. Son of former boss Giuseppe DiCarlo, Joseph was considered to take over his dad's organization when he died, but was ultimately deemed too young and immature for such a job. He would have made Pops proud though, By 1946, DiCarlo had been arrested 26 times and earned the title of Public Enemy Number 1 in Buffalo. DiCarlo had supervised operations in Utica and Rochester, but in 1945 he was downgraded from his duties. After spending many years in trouble as a subordinate of Magaddino, Joe DiCarlo and his underlings decided to try their luck in a different area and went seeking their fortunes in Youngstown, Ohio. Over in Youngstown, DiCarlo and his brother-in-law Sam Pieri ran gambling rackets there for about a decade through the 1940s. Then they wanted to go somewhere where it was warm, so they relocated again, this time to Miami Beach, Florida, and set up rackets there. DiCarlo returned home to advise and lead a Buffalo-based insurrection against Magaddino and try to establish an independent Buffalo crime family. While often in the shadow of his better-known brother, Sam DiCarlo was an influential underworld figure and participated in some of the more important mafia events in U.S. history. While his brother Joseph viewed Magaddino as a rival and an obstacle, Sam, however, seemed to have an easier time finding a place in his crime family. He became a Magaddino ambassador representing his boss at national mafia events. Sam was arrested with about 20 other mafiosi from around the country at the Cleveland Stalter Hotel in 1928 and again at the Appalachian Summit in 1957. Randascio joined Buffalo's DiCarlo gang at a young age. One of their favorite rackets was extortion, and Randascio became an expert at extracting money from gambling operators. After DiCarlo and his crew moved to Youngstown, Randascio was able to slide up the ranks and become the chief enforcer for the family. Randascio is often described as a great organizer and traveled frequently to Hamilton and Toronto, Canada to review Buffalo-controlled operations there. By 1958, Randascio was Magaddino's chief lieutenant in Buffalo and overseer of all mafia gambling operations in the city. His brother Victor successfully infiltrated Union Local 210 and controlled it for several years for the family. Fred's other brother Albert was just another racketeer in the lower echelon of the family. As an early member of the DiCarlo gang, Naturale became involved in extortion and was often included in the armed robbery jobs. During the 1950s and early 60s, Naturale was a key figure in the Buffalo gambling racket supervised by Randascio. By the time 1965 rolled around, Naturale was one of Magaddino's top lieutenants and supervised several rackets for the family. After his release from prison, Naturale had been moved to an underworld leadership position in Niagara Falls and began shaking down the larger bookmakers and taking a cut of all family rackets in the city. The Falcones were wise guy brothers who were Buffalo family heavyweights and expert racketeers. They were both prominent capos in the Utica faction of the family. Camilleri was one of Randascio's top lieutenants and controlled labor and union racketeering and was labeled Public Enemy Number 14 on a list compiled by the Buffalo Police Commissioner. A U.S. Senate subcommittee described his position as handling union problems as a lieutenant for Stefano Magaddino's Buffalo crime family. Camilleri became a construction labor foreman with Laborers Local 210. In 1948, he established the J.C. Concrete Company and began working closely with Victor Randascio to ensure Magaddino crime family control of Local 210. Camilleri was getting forced out of the Union in 1973 and did not keep his disappointment a secret. He expressed his discontentment with Pieri's leadership and threatened to pull his crew out of the family altogether. On the evening of May 8, 1974, Camilleri celebrated his 63rd birthday with friends at Buffalo's Roseland restaurant. As soon as he stepped from his automobile, a sedan pulled up behind him and a man hopped out and fired 3 shots, leaving Camilleri dead on the sidewalk. Ruffino was into counterfeiting early on and later engaged in drug trafficking. Anthony Perna has a long police record of 33 arrests, including rape, sodomy, kidnapping, extortion, felonious assault, counterfeiting, and pimping. He was a big loan shark in Buffalo, but his business and underworld prestige took a hit because of his gambling problems. Coppola was a well-known Buffalo mobster who was involved in selling and distributing illegal alcohol and smuggling contraband across the U.S.-Canadian border. Acquisto was a top Magaddino lieutenant who rose to underboss but was busted stealing from family proceeds. He knew he was about to be killed, so he decided to make it easy for him and went ahead and killed himself. Some more prominent Buffalo wise guys from back in the day. Next up is Stefano's one and only son, Peter. Born into a mafia family, Peter was destined to be a wise guy. His mafia pedigree afforded him preferential treatment, which put him in position so he could build his wealth. In 1940, Peter opened a funeral home with Paul Palmeri and took over the operation when Palmeri left Niagara Falls. He already had a college degree and then went to mortuary school and became a legit certified funeral director. Peter was a reliable member of his father's faction until Stefano died July 19, 1974. At that point, Peter removed himself from all criminal activities. The American Mafia claims Canada. To make sure they had order north of the border, the Commission divvied up Canada and decided that Magaddino would control Ontario and absorb the Papalia faction operating there, and Joseph Bonanno would acquire Quebec and take in the Patroni organization. Magaddino would then induct Papalia as a made man into the Buffalo Borgata and was made boss of the Canadian wing of the family. Johnny Papalia followed his father into a life of crime and was lucky enough to get mentored by two Cosa Nostra legends, Carmine Galante and Vic Catroni. In 1955, Papalia expanded and started opening charter gambling clubs in Hamilton and Toronto, in addition to his loan sharking and bookmaking rackets. In 1959, Papalia was the only Canadian that attended the meeting in New York that formally set up the French Connection smuggling network, a smuggling operation that supplied over 80% of America's heroin market between the 1960s and 70s. By that time, Johnny was considered the biggest organized crime figure in Ontario. Papalia began extorting everyone, legitimate and illegitimate businesses, it didn't matter. He was even extorting stockbrokers $1,000 a week in protection money. He was known as a tyrannical boss who had no tolerance for failure and made a point of taunting and punishing his men for any mistake, no matter how minor. Always by Johnny's side was his brother Frank. Frank would follow his brother into a life of crime and was his most trusted confidant. He would supervise a large portion of the rackets. Frank was the polar opposite of John. While John was flashy, wild, and unpredictable, Frank was more calm, conservative, and rational. Barillo was Johnny Pops' right-hand man. He and his crew specialized in loan sharking, drug smuggling, and bookmaking. Considered to be a terrifying figure, Barillo and his cronies would raid gambling houses that refused to pay protection money and intimidate, beat up, and rob their gamblers. By the late 80s, Barillo was in charge of all Papalia operations in the Niagara Peninsula area. He took over the top spot in Ontario after Johnny was killed, but he experienced the same fate a few months later. Chard was a former Canadian professional boxer turned gangster who served as the principal enforcer for Johnny Papalia in Toronto. Papalia's other principal lieutenant was Anio Mora. Mora ran Papalia family operations in the greater Toronto area. Mora was ruthless and known for his practice of dousing those behind on loans with gasoline and threatening to burn them alive if they don't pay up. Giacomo was the founder of the Lupino organization of Hamilton. Originally a Negrata organization, his crime family has since fallen under control of the Buffalo crime family. Volpe was a Toronto-based gangster who was sponsored into the Buffalo crime family by Giacomo Lupino. He had his hand in many rackets, such as loan sharking, labor racketeering, stock fraud, and various real estate scams. He began running a casino in Port-au-Prince, Haiti in 1963 and did that until returning to Toronto in 65 when he began forming a formal crew that did not favor a specific ethnicity. Volpe was respected for his intelligence and ability to make money, but always seen as an outsider within mafia circles. He had a reputation for being devious and treacherous and was viewed as a troublesome and distant character within the mafia, a loner who did not cultivate close ties with other mafiosi. Silvestro was an influential mafia leader in Ontario and a large-scale narcotics trafficker who was closely allied with important mafia racketeers in the US, Canada, and Italy. Gasparini had deep roots in Canada and was married to the daughter of Tony Silvestro. He was a bookmaker, loan shark, and engaged in a lot of narcotics trafficking. Aguisi was a Buffalo family soldier who specialized in narcotics trafficking north of the border. One thing Stefano loves first and foremost is money. Every so often he would increase the required amount of tribute his guys are expected to kick up, which usually pissed everybody off. After one such increase, a Buffalo family bookmaker out of Batavia, Frank Latempio, was frustrated and upset that he had to kick up a larger percentage to his jolly old boss Magaddino and was determined to do something about it. He decided the easiest thing to do would be to blow him up, so he and his brothers placed a bomb by what they thought was Stefano's house, but it wasn't. These idiots placed the bomb by the house next door where his sister lived. Stefano's sister and her 3 daughters were home when the bomb went off. Those kids were injured but survived. I can't say the same for his sister. She was killed in the blast. Stefano was livid. He couldn't believe one of his guys had the audacity to go after him, and he was determined to make an example out of him and immediately put a contract out on his life. Mob up-and-comer Sam Pieri was Latempio's cousin and apparently saw an opportunity to score points with the boss. Pieri arranged for Latempio to attend the wedding of a relative in Buffalo. Following the reception, Pieri escorted Latempio to his car. After a short conversation, Pieri shook his hand and turned away. Then two men emerged from a parked car and shot Latempio to death. That was a close one for Don Stefano, but that wouldn't be the only time Magaddino's greed put him at odds with his guys. Magaddino loves that money, and that became a real problem. It destroyed his relationship with his men. Claiming there had been a dramatic drop-off in racket revenues, Magaddino imposed additional taxes on his men and eliminated bonuses he previously paid out to his lieutenants, most notably the big Christmas bonus coming up. Then a few months later, an FBI investigation of a sports betting ring led to a search of Peter Magaddino's home that turned up nearly $500,000 in cash. Buffalo family leaders were upset with their boss and believed he could not be trusted to lead the family. They used the reports of the discovered cash to ignite a rebellion against the Magaddino administration and formed a rebel breakaway faction. In July '69, the rebel faction selected Sam Pieri as acting boss, Giuseppino as acting underboss, and Giuseppe DiCarlo as acting consigliere. Pieri first ran into trouble with the law when he was just 10 years old. He would drop out of school after the 7th grade and went full steam ahead into a life of crime. Pieri and his brothers became members of their brother-in-law Joe DiCarlo's gang. They extorted payments from crap game operators and bookmaking parlors. Pieri earned the respect of his boss Stefano Magaddino when he imposed mob discipline upon a relative, Frank Latempio, when he ushered him to his death. Stefano was impressed that Pieri put the Brigada before his family. Pieri would serve a 10-year stretch for a narcotics pinch. The prison term enhanced Pieri's stature in the underworld. Within the institution walls, he established strong relationships with members of the Profaci and Genovese crime families and became especially close to jail crime boss Vito Genovese. The discovery of that money drove a wedge between Buffalo Mafiosi and the organization's Niagara Falls-based leadership, causing a splinter group within the family. Well liked by his peers, Pieri was unanimously selected as the boss of the rebel faction. Wherever Sam was, Joe wouldn't be far behind. Although not as popular as his brother, Joe was an excellent earner and labor racketeer, but he preferred to operate in the shadows. Fino's record of 22 arrests was noted when he was sent to serve a bit at Attica. While there, he developed a close relationship with Daniel Sansonis. After their release, the two went to work for the Magaddino crime family, managing gambling and loan sharking rackets. Fino would steadily rise through the ranks, and by the 1960s he was one of the top racketeers in the family, running a $5,000 a day bookmaking operation. Following the imprisonment of Randascio in '68, Fino was promoted to underboss. The next year the crime family splintered and the rebel faction chose Fino to be an underboss of their administration. Joseph's lifelong partner in crime was his brother Nick. Sansonis was involved in a lot of armed robberies early on. He was critically wounded in a gun battle with police when they interrupted a morning holdup of a Buffalo drugstore. While serving a 30-year stretch for first-degree armed robbery, Sansonis developed a strong relationship with Giuseppino while both were in Attica. In the late 50s, early 60s, authorities identified Sansonis as the chief enforcer and collector for Freddie Randascio. A strong supporter of the rebellion, Sansonis was moved up to underboss by Fino and Pieri was sent to prison in the early 70s. Carlisi established the C&C Market, a wholesale seafood company in Buffalo. His underworld connections afforded him a monopoly on the wholesaling of clams that would linger for several decades. Carlisi opened Club 97 in 1948. The place became a popular night spot for members of the Buffalo underworld. The Bureau's Buffalo field office labeled Carlisi a top hoodlum, although he largely avoided the attention of law enforcement by focusing on his legitimate businesses. Closely aligned with the rebel faction, Carlisi played an important advisory role in the Buffalo crime family in the early 70s and helped to oversee mob control of the labor's Local 210. As a young man, LaDuca drove a taxicab for John Montana's taxi company and was later secretary and treasurer of the Hotel and Restaurants Workers Union and the Magaddino Memorial Chapel. LaDuca had no arrest record prior to his pinch at the Appalachian Summit, and he would go on to marry Magaddino's daughter, which would put him in the upper echelon of the family. Tronalone was raised in the tenements of Buffalo's Dante's Place and reportedly earned his nickname by giving peanuts to the neighborhood children visiting his father's store. By 1933, Tronalone was closely associated with the DiCarlo gang and served as Joe DiCarlo's chief lieutenant during the gang's efforts to control gambling and bookmaking rackets in Buffalo. In 1946, Tronalone left Buffalo with DiCarlo and relocated to Youngstown, Ohio. Under the supervision of then-Capo James Licavoli, they took control of local bookmaking and gambling operations. Tronalone would stay put in Cleveland and become a heavyweight in their Brigada and eventually become boss of the family. While serving time in Attica, Frank Moore became close with Giuseppino and Daniel Sansonis. greatly enhancing his stature within the family. Previously a laborer on various construction sites, Frank Giamore was a member of the mob Link Laborers Local 210 and also became involved in gambling rackets. Having joined the breakaway faction, Frank Giamore was moved into the nominal position of acting boss by faction leaders when Pieri and Fino got jammed up with indictments. But it turned out he was merely serving as a stand-in for Pieri and the real power rested with Carlisi and Sansonis. Mancuso was a Buffalo heavyweight and family enforcer. He was a highly feared strong-arm and killer in his youth. As a jack of all rackets, Mancuso engaged in labor racketeering, armed robbery, safe cracking, and fencing stolen jewels. Falzone was a career criminal and a longtime leader of the mob-plagued Laborers International Union Local 210. For a time, Falzone supervised the $82.8 million pension fund. Falzone was sent to prison for racketeering despite the government's efforts to convict him for several murders he was suspected of, but they were ultimately unsuccessful. Salvatore Benito has a criminal history dating back to 1928 and has been in and out of jail his whole life. Benito is reputed to be a good, safe man and an expert with nitroglycerin. He's been involved in every type of crime, including burglary, counterfeiting, robberies, but later in life his main interest was organized gambling. Pat was the manager of a tavern owned by his mother. It was nothing more than a den of inequities where suspected holes-up men, burglars, pimps, and gamblers used to frequent. Pat was sort of a tip man. He provided tips for jobs and heists to his cohorts for a piece of the take. His MO was to drive the burglars to the scene of the crime and then circle the area and warn them if police are nearby. Romano was a Fino and Sansonis crony who did a lot of the grunt work. He was involved in various gambling rackets and often used as a loan shark collector. Doing a lot of the heavy lifting early on really paid off as he was eventually promoted to captain. Believe it or not, that rebel faction wasn't the only time Magaddino had a faction of his crime family want to break away from his borgata. In the mid-60s, Frank Valenti would successfully succeed the Rochester faction of the Buffalo family and become its own borgata with him at the helm. Frank was born in Pittsburgh, where he became a powerful crime figure throughout the 1930s through the 50s. His brother Stanley was running the Rochester crew when he got locked up for refusing to answer questions about the Appalachian meeting in '57. Fellow wise guy Jake Russo took the opportunity to seize control of that faction. Frank tried to intervene, but he was ordered out of the state for 3 years following a conviction for violating election laws. He moved back to Pittsburgh in the early 60s, serving as a capo in the Pittsburgh family under John LaRocca. In 1964, with LaRocca's blessing, Valenti returned to Rochester and took control of the family. It was about that time when Russo disappeared, never to be seen again. In 1970, Valenti informed Magaddino that the Rochester faction would no longer pay tribute to Buffalo and that they were on their own as their own family with the support of the Pittsburgh crime family. With the commission's blessing, Valenti was now the official boss of the Rochester family. The Magaddino era was a long one. It provided over a half a century's worth of stories, events, crimes, killings, and chaos. And for those involved, it provided a wealth of memories of a time that has long passed and will never be replicated. Magaddino had a variety of heart ailments for several years and died of a heart attack on July 19, 1974 at the age of 82. He served as the family leader for 52 years without a stint in prison, an impressive feat and a record tenure for a mob boss. The deaths of Joe DiCarlo in 1980 and Sam Pieri in '81 weakened the Pieri wing of the family and permitted the rise of the Todaro Era. The transition between the Pieri-DiCarlo administration and the new Todaro regime was completed in autumn of '84. At that time, Frank Giamore retired and allowed Joseph Todaro Sr. to take over as boss. Todaro Sr. started off his criminal career as a feared enforcer for the Buffalo family. By the time he was promoted to capo regime, he reportedly controlled bookmaking operations in Buffalo along with his son, Joe Jr. In addition to being a leg breaker, Todaro Sr. was a big earner for the Buffalo family, controlling numerous rackets of bookmaking, card and dice games, loan sharking rings, Las Vegas junkets, and labor rackets. Outside of his connections to organized crime, Todaro Sr. operated La Nova Pizzeria in Buffalo. He founded the pizza joint in '57 and grew it from one small West Side restaurant to a multi-million-dollar business that sells frozen pizza, chicken wings, and hot sauce. Todaro Sr. conducted mob affairs and held meetings from local hotel rooms and VIP rooms out of the Executive Inn, the 747 Disco, and the Old Playboy Club. In 1996, the FBI named Todaro Sr. as the man in control of labor racketeering, bookmaking, loan sharking, and narcotics trafficking in the greater Buffalo area, and accused him of secretly influencing the Laborers International Union in North America since the 1960s. Born chock full of mafia pedigree, Joe Jr.'s path in life was already paved for him as he eagerly followed his father into a life of crime. Todaro Jr. runs Dad's pizza joint, La Nova Pizzeria, which is one of Buffalo's most popular restaurants, and frequently donates a large number of pizzas to various charities. In 2006, Todaro Sr. retired and Joe Jr. became the official boss of the Buffalo family. The FBI describes Todaro Jr. as a lifelong criminal who, with his father, runs the Buffalo organized crime family, responsible for murders, loan sharking, narcotics trafficking, gambling, and other assorted crimes. Joe Jr. has never been convicted of a felony, and of course, his attorneys through the years have always denied FBI allegations about his mob connections. Other notable wise guys in the Todaro era. Operating on Buffalo's west side, Butchie rose to be a captain largely focused on labor racketeering and other white-collar crimes. He was the deputy administrator and the collection coordinator of the local 210 pension fund before being forced out of the union in 1996. Payne Pinto was a prominent member of the local 210 before also being forced out in 96. Since then, his focus has been running an illegal gambling business from the Donato Social Club. Pinero is the current underboss of the family. He used to be Buffalo's man in Las Vegas and operated a car dealership there. While operating in Vegas in '97, Pinero was indicted with members of the LA crime family for the robbery and murder of Chicago outfit Las Vegas associate Fat Herbie Blitzstein. In the late '60s, Nicoletti Jr. worked with his father controlling a sportsbook operation in Niagara Falls. He would eventually take over as the Niagara Falls capo from his dad and has been controlling a large bookmaking operation there since the 1970s. In June of '59, Canarazzo was rushed to the hospital in critical condition for multiple bullet wounds when he was hit by a volley of shots fired through the window at the Madison Cab Company in Buffalo, where he was working as a dispatcher. He would survive the attack, but his assailant, James DeMont, fled the Buffalo area. His battered corpse was found less than a year later in a field outside San Bernardino, California. His head had been bashed in with a blunt instrument. Johnny Katz was a local 210 steward indicted for extorting $35,000 to guarantee labor peace and was handed a 27-month stretch for having a no-show union job. In November of '88, Johnny Katz was among 200 arrested for his part in an international drug trafficking ring between Buffalo and Sicily. Operating from Unica, Carson ran loan sharking, gambling, and extortion rackets in the area. He was known to force any local bookmakers to make regular payments to him. In 2000, Carson was indicted for running a Utica-based shoplifting and fencing ring who stole goods valued in the tens of millions of dollars from hundreds of retail store chains like Walmart, Kmart, and CVS. Sonny was a former Nicoletti and Falzone crew member who was described by police as the king of illegal sports betting in western New York and was known as one of the largest bookmakers in the area. Considered the bookmaker's bookmaker, police and gambling experts described him as the biggest known bookmaker in the region in the last 4 decades. Daniel Sansonese had 2 wise guy sons, Danny Jr. and Victor was the more prominent out of the 2. Victor became a made man in the mid-'70s and has been serving as the family consigliere for years. In 1989, Victor was identified as their director of training for Local 210 and accused of controlling bookmaking for the Todaros. Back over to Canada, we had Rocco Lapino, son of legendary mobster Jack Lapino, and like his father, he was a longtime underworld leader in Hamilton, Ontario. He took over his father's organization after his death, which was a subset or a Canadian wing of the Buffalo family. Son of Paolo Violi and grandson of Giacomo Lapino, Dom came from a long line of mafiosi heavyweights. In October 2017, Violi met with boss Big Joe Todaro in Florida and was promoted to underboss of the Buffalo family, making him the first Canadian to hold the second highest position in the American Mafia. Joe Violi is Dom's brother, a career criminal and a lifelong racketeer in Ontario.